I've been talking to a lot of people over the last few months that think that aliens are angels.
The angels and demons of the Bible are real. They are the extraterrestrial time travelers.
And the government has known that for a long time, possibly going back to the 1930s at least.
Since 1930, they have known that this plane exists.
We don't have souls, but it's just the other way around. The soul has us.
But why won't they tell the American people?
You have spiritual beings that don't understand or really care for the physical world.
A dreadful looking plane in the sky, a half a mile by a half a mile. Built like the universe itself. It's circular and it holds within it 1,500 little wheel-like planes.
Whether you're following UFO news daily, weekly, monthly, or not at all, you're still seeing it a lot. It's coming up more than ever before and from places you'd never expect. And as the noise increases, so have the theories about what UFOs actually are. And people are falling within one of two main camps right now: aliens or angels.
So is there evidence of angels and aliens being one of the same?
Are these things physical beings with a body and a species and possibly a home planet? Or, as some of the leading minds in the UFO inner circles are proposing, these things are actually angels and demons, spiritual beings without bodies. So how could a seemingly obvious sci-fi plot have to compete with a religious concept like this? I mean, with few exceptions, in PR moments, the theologians have always avoided the ET topic. Or at least that's what most of us thought.
Angels and devils. And that's like when you're hearing about like all those stories in the Bible about fallen angels and devils, like these people think that they were referring to aliens.
One of the most mainstream figures who's joined the debate is Tucker Carlson. Tucker isn't someone you'd call a true believer of the official UFO narrative. In fact, he's poked holes in it several times. But the interesting thing about Carlson to me is that he's a very well-informed person who talks to a lot of different people and has come to some very interesting conclusions based on those conversations and his own worldview.
You had mentioned several times that you think that the UFO, UAP type phenomena stuff is all spiritual.
I think so. I mean, look, I should just state about every topic, like, I don't know shit.
Nobody knows shit.
I'm satisfied that I know enough, and I don't really want to know that much more. Because what I think I know is, this doesn't help me at all to know that. So that's a conclusion I've reached. I'm usually pretty curious. I've stopped being curious about this because I don't want to know anymore. But
you truly don't want to know anymore about it.
I think I know. I think I know what's up.
Can you articulate it?
Well, I think it's a really old story. I think it's a really old story. So that's what I think.
What is it?
One thing that you notice about every world religion I'm familiar with, I'm interested in that topic. There are commonalities between religions. Jesus is unique, and I believe in Jesus, so. But there are commonalities that are very striking between all world religions I'm aware of and all creation myths. And one of them, and this is of course true for Christianity, very true, is that the belief that supernatural beings take physical form. They all believe that. The Greek myths, Jesus, most famously, but that they take physical form, that they're not just like some ethereal, they're not just shadows floating around, specters, fog, that they're physical. Like, they're as real as the arm of your chair. And that they reproduce with people. Again, Christianity believes that. Jesus, Immaculate Conception, spirit reproduces with human woman. If every culture in the world that we know about, who's left any kind of written or physical record, is reaching the same conclusions about something, maybe there's something there.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's not so crazy to think that what everyone else has always thought since the beginning of time, which that there is this combination in cases of, human beings and the spiritual realm, whatever that is. I can speak about it with no precision at all because I don't understand the specifics of it, but I know that it has been written about since people have been writing.
One of the few people we know Tucker has actually spoken to about UFOs is Dr. Gary Nolan. Nolan is part of the Invisible College, a Rosicrucian offshoot of academia that has been investigating the UFO phenomenon for decades. But we'll get into that later. In 2023, Tucker had Nolan on his show where they discussed the topic in detail. Here, Gary explains what he believes UFOs and aliens are.
I mean, look, if you're an intelligence, are you going to go down on a planet with a bunch of angry monkeys who might kill you? No, unlikely. You'll send some intermediary. Well, what kind of intermediary are you going to send? You're going to send something that maybe almost looks like them, but isn't them. So I think, and this is, again, from inside the intelligence community, most of what we think we're seeing are avatars, biological robots that are basically put there to be the minions, if you will.
And that's the current view of the intel community.
It is a hypothesis.
What could possibly be controlling these biological machines that were built specifically to interact with us? To answer this question, I only had to look at other interviews Gary Nolan has done, like this one from 2022 on the Lex Fridman podcast. Again, the language Gary uses is very important here.
How would you, as a higher intelligence, represent yourself to a lesser intelligence? Well, let's go back to pre-civilization. Maybe you show yourself as the spirits in the forest, and you give messages through that. Once you get a little bit more civilized, then you show yourself as the gods. And then you're God. Well, we don't believe in God anymore necessarily. Not everybody does. So what do we believe in? We believe in technology. So you show yourself as a form of technology, right? But the common thread is you're not alone. And there's something else here with you. And there's something that's, as you said, watching you, and at least watching over your shoulder. But I think that, like any good parent, you don't tell your student everything. You make them learn. And learning requires mistakes, because if you tell them everything, then they get lazy.
Keep in mind, this is one of the leading academics on the UFO topic in the world. Yet he's explaining the UFO phenomenon using terminology that is interchangeable with how someone would describe a guardian angel. The picture becomes even more complete with this clip from the 2023 SALT conference.
What do you, Gary, Dr. Nolan, you have to speculate. What do you think it is? Let's be bold.
I think it is an advanced form of intelligence, something that we don't understand, that is using some kind of intermediaries. You know, it's not that they walk amongst us, that, wearing a skin suit are actually the alien, right? No, you're going to basically put something there that is, I think of it as an intelligence test. Can you see what's in front of you for what it really is? Yeah. Can you see the anomalous data point that is there that you realize what it is? I mean, when the South American native tribes first saw the Spanish ships coming across the horizon, they didn't realize what it was. They couldn't see it for what it was. So you just need to show yourself to enough to acculturate.
Yeah.
Now, if you've been around for a long time, and this is something that I do think has been on, they've been around for a long time, they are affecting our culture, right? It's actually often thought that many of the religions that we think of as the most important have been part of this process.
Dr. Jacques Vallée, international authority on the UFO experience.
The first thing I'd like to dispel is a frequent misconception that UFOs are limited to this country. Very often people ask me, how come I never hear about UFOs in other parts of the world? How come we only hear about UFOs in America? Well, UFOs are not an American phenomenon. They are a worldwide phenomenon. That's one of their most dramatic characteristics. The first major wave of sightings, and sightings tend to come in very intense series over a couple of months, over a given region of the world. The first such major wave occurred over Scandinavia in 1946.
Arguably the most famous ufologist in the world living today is Dr. Jacques Vallée. Vallée has been involved in ufology longer than I've been alive. In fact, he was featured as a character in the Steven Spielberg film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And he wasn't the only one featured. Although an actor played Jacques Vallée in the film because of scheduling conflicts, his friend and fellow Rosicrucian, J. Allen Hynek, was featured in the film as a cameo. Dr. J. Allen Hynek's origin with UFOs goes all the way back to 1952, where as an astronomer he served as the scientific advisor for Project Blue Book, a study of UFOs conducted by the U.S. Air Force from 1952 to 1969.
Jacques Vallée is just one of these people, right, that you come across his work and he's fascinating. So I thought it was strange that not only was he a person who was, pre-engineered ARPANET, right? He was on ARPANET, which is pre-internet. He was creating that at the same time as being obsessed with UFOs and doing, being a ufologist.
Another thing that was really fascinating about your book was you were talking about how much religion he studied.
Yes. That was really interesting. So in the book, what I do is I uncover not just him, but Allen Hynek. They were friends. And they were both Rosicrucians, which is a form of, he might not like me to say this, but it's a form of mystical Christianity in a sense. But a lot of Rosicrucians don't view their roots as Christian. They look at it as Egyptian. And both of them believe in this kind of life, this meditating and things like that. And so I included references. Everything I say in my books, by the way, I pass to the person that I'm writing the chapter about. So everything that I said about Jacques, I gave it to him beforehand, and I said, are you okay with me saying this publicly? And so it passed all the tests. And I also talk about going to his apartment and seeing his library, which is an amazing library. And he has stained glass from Chartres Cathedral. And Chartres Cathedral is a special place for Rosicrucians, like a special place of presence of the sacred. And he actually did those himself. So he learned how to do stained glass from people at Chartres, by the way. And yeah, just amazing. And he had a lot of books on angels and fallen angels in that library, like almost like it was almost like going into the Vatican archive, going into this place, because these looked like first editions or close. So, really, really old books about this topic.
Fallen angel.
Yeah. I was pretty shocked when I went. We were going to have lunch and talk about the crash site and maybe talk about, what I learned from Tyler and that kind of thing. And we went to lunch, and then he said, do you want to see the library? And I was like, yes, of course. So I saw the handwritten documents from Project Blue Book, and that was just going into the library. That wasn't actually in the library. Then when we got in there, I noticed big bookcases of these books, and of course I was drawn to them. And he said he picked out one and he opened it, and it was about angels. And he said, "This is a book about angels." And I could see that, and I was looking at it. I was like, "Wow!" And then I looked at the other bookshelf, and that bookshelf was just as impressive. And then it was about fallen angels. He said, "Oh, this one's about fallen angels." And then he made a joke, and he said, "You can't have one without the other."
The Rosicrucian tradition really only broke the surface in human history in the 1600s. The first Rosicrucian documents appeared in the 1600s with texts like Fama Fraternitatis in 1604 in Germany. Now, when these Rosicrucian texts first became available, one of the things that they emphasized in these texts was that the Rosicrucian organization wasn't connected to any one authoritative teacher, and it wasn't connected to any particular type of control structure. There was no institution for it. It was really a very free and independent path of modern initiation. Now, the challenge of explaining some of the more obscure aspects of Rosicrucian spiritual initiation is that some of the practices really don't make a lot of sense until you understand the context that they're within. So we have to present a little bit of the Rosicrucian view of the context of all created life and for the evolution of the human being. So it all begins understanding the whole set of processes by understanding where everything comes from. So starting from these differentiated thought forms in the mind of God at a very high level, those thought forms have within them specific patterns. the pattern of what will later become something that crystallizes into the physical world, or the nature of a spiritual being, or a spiritual process of some type. So as the thoughts from the mind of God move down, and we have the manifested beings, in the classical Western tradition, there is understood to be 9 different ranks of angelic beings. These different beings are of different levels of maturity, have different levels of the expansion of their consciousness, and different possibilities for action. They invisibly guide and affect our consciousness and life every minute of every day, but we don't perceive it, just as we don't normally have organs to perceive non-physical realities until they're developed. In classical texts, they describe the spiritual hierarchies, they describe the angelic beings in very specific ways. Their names actually mean particular things. So if you look at the names of the archangels, Raphael means God heals. The name Michael means who is as God. So different beings, their names actually mean something. The angels are sometimes referred to as God's messengers. And it was understood that we had to actually be clear about what beings were interacting with us. Because if we just say, oh, I spoke to God, or God told me this, it's too amorphous. We don't know what being's actually speaking to us. And not all the beings are beneficial. If we take a look at what we're looking at tonight, there's another pattern that's laid within the tree of life, which is that it has 3 different pillars inside of it. There are beings that connect to the middle pillar. They go all the way up and all the way down. That means they connect to the highest levels of the Godhead, and they also connect all the way down to the level of the manifest creation. This is connected to the Christ or Christic beings, or within the monotheistic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They refer to them as Michaelic beings. And so that idea that Michael holds the quality of the Godhead, but reduced in scale to where it can be interacted with at an archangelic level. So toward one hand, toward the left-hand pillar, you have spiritual beings that don't understand or really care for the physical world. They're not into that. The physical world is something that seems like a place of suffering. And many of the ancient traditions of the world were heavily influenced by these beings, with teachings of the physical world being an illusion, of the physical world being a place of suffering, get off the cycle of karma and reincarnation, etc. These spiritual beings are advanced spiritual beings, more advanced than human beings. And they also have tremendous spiritual light. When one encounters them, one does not encounter a being of darkness. One encounters a being of tremendous light. And so the name given to the leader of this particular spiritual group was Lucifer. But the Luciferic beings were understood as beings of great spiritual light, but who do not completely understand physical reality or the process of human evolution in the physical world. To them it seems like we're children being tortured in a place we don't need to be, so get off the cycle and go back to spirit. Now on the other hand, as you might imagine, it's the exact opposite polarity. It's going to be deeply connected to the process of linking onto the physical materialization process and loving physicality. And in the Persian Zoroastrian tradition, they referred to these beings as Angramenu or Ahriman. So human beings can fall into this as well by becoming completely materialistic, so that we don't even believe that spirit exists. Spirit is some type of illusion that we have. There's nothing but random evolution over time through completely physical biological processes, and there is no spirit, there's nothing of that kind. So this becomes a kind of modern materialistic scientific perspective that's very sharp in some ways, but has absolutely no spiritual perception. And so for complete materialists, they fall completely into this pillar. Now the Ahrimanic aspect then took on other names in other times. The Gnostics referred to the being of Ahriman, or the beings of the same quality referred to as Ahrimanic beings, as the Demiurge. So you read all these Gnostic texts about the Demiurge, the dark lord of this earth, that created the physical world. Has many different manifestations in the Gnostic text, and you can find variants on that in other traditions as well, like in South America. Then in Egypt, this polarity was referred to as Set. That term Set, when the Hebrew people left Egypt, led by Moses, who had been initiated in the Egyptian temples, that term Set became Ha-Satan, and so Set became Satan. Now Ha-Satan is a Hebrew term meaning the adversary, and so it means that this is a being that has an adversarial relationship to the human being. Now this idea of holding the balance between these two types of beings is something that plays out in everyday life, and it's a constant dynamic process for every human being. If we were to strip away the veil we would see that these invisible Luciferic and Ahrimanic beings are influencing our consciousness at all times to go to one direction or the other, just as the beneficial beings are also connecting with us. And in the ancient temple science, it was understood that our connection to these beings was purely through resonance. When we think in a particular manner, when we feel in a particular manner, all of our thoughts, all of our feelings, all of our internal states have an energetic quality to them, and they will resonate like an antenna with qualities of the exact same type in the other worlds. We're influenced by these types of beings all the time. We are like fish that live in an ocean that don't know there's any water. These beings are surrounding us all the time, and our boundaries are actually not solid. They move through us, our consciousness, our feeling life, all the time.
I think it's really necessary to know what these angels are, where they come from, and what their motivations might be. Now we need to know how they interact with a human being. And to do that, we have to understand the different bodies of the human being, because these other bodies are where most of these interactions are taking place.
So the next thing we want to look at is the structure of the human being. There are different levels of a human being. In the esoteric tradition, we'll talk about a human physical body. In Sanskrit, they refer to as the sheath made of food. That's the literal name in Sanskrit for the physical body, the sheath made of food, because we take in physical substance, we put it into a field of force that is the outline of our body, and then it fills it out with physical substance. Then we have the level of life energy, that's called chi, ki, prana in the East, or the etheric in the West, from the Greek term for life energy. It's related to the element of water in physical elements. Then we have our consciousness body, which includes both our emotional and mental function. Sometimes this is referred to generally as the astral, or sometimes it's broken down to being the emotional and mental body, which can also be referred to as the lower and upper astral. But there are all just various ways to break it apart. But essentially it's the consciousness field of God that we bring into ourselves as an individualized astral body. And that emotion and mind aspect is related to the element of air. And then our self-awareness, our I am presence, is related to fire. This is what the Rosicrucians refer to as the ego with a capital E. But it's important to understand that when they say that, they don't mean the ego of psychology. It's not your little ego. This is your I am presence. This is your divine spark of being self-aware. So that's the whole thing through the Jewish Kabbalistic mysteries of the burning bush, I am, the 7 I am sayings of the Christ in the Gospel of John, etc.
We return you now to your regularly scheduled program.
You suggest that UFOs are deliberately trying to manipulate our subconscious mind to create a mythology in our culture about themselves, which is one of the reasons that they're both physical and concrete, yet very elusive at the same time. Do you still feel that way?
Could the UFO phenomenon be manipulating us? Could it be a teaching system of some sort? Perhaps something that we are creating ourselves, perhaps a series of images that we are projecting. I think Carl Jung came very close to expressing that idea in one of his books.
Now, the reference to Carl Jung at the end isn't accidental. Jungian psychology is often used as a mask to hide these more esoteric ideas within ufology. Now, Carl Jung was a Swiss psychologist who introduced the idea of archetypes, which are universal symbols shared by all humans in dreams, stories, and myths. Now, these include figures representing wisdom, protection, guidance, similar to angels in various spiritual traditions. Though not directly influenced by Rosicrucianism, Jung's work was shaped by mystical traditions like alchemy and Gnosticism, which served as the source for Rosicrucian ideas. This connection led to Jungian psychology's popularity in ufology, where thought leaders like Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek found direct parallels between Jungian archetypes and their own UFO research.
I mean, I wrote about synchronicity in American Cosmic. I've talked about some of the things that happened to me with respect to synchronicity. You know, Jacques, back in the day, and even today, you know, still grapples with this idea of synchronicity and ties it into this invisible college, which is an early modern idea of Rosicrucianism, actually.
So beyond synchronicity, which is a very interesting topic by itself, there's another Jungian concept that I believe sheds even more light on this esoteric UFO worldview. And that is the dream.
Jung thought about the dream as nature speaking of its own accord. And so his idea was, well, when you sleep, you dream, but the dream happens to you. It's not something that you create the way that, and you don't even think about creating it. Because I might say, well, what are you thinking about? And you'll say, I'm thinking about whatever it is, and you'll take credit in some sense for thinking that because it seems like a voluntary activity. But what happens at night is that you think, but you think involuntarily. And so what Jung would say is that means that something is thinking in you. There are things that think in you. What are those things? And what are they thinking? And why are they thinking it?
The same thing here. Higher spiritual beings can give us information about what we need to do with our lives to help other people, all kinds of great processes, if we have the core concepts to begin with that they can work with. Otherwise, it's really hard to communicate with us in a way that moves up to their level.
The dream is trying to tell you what it's trying to tell you as clear as it can. That's just the best it can do. And so you could think of the dream, and this is, I believe, the right way to think about it. The dream is the birthplace of thought, the same way that artists are the birthplace of culture.
They are affecting our culture. Many of the religions that we think of as the most important have been part of this process.
It's exactly the same process. It's that your mind is groping outward to try to comprehend what it has not yet comprehended. And it does that first by trying to map it onto image.
Some people will process the clairvoyance primarily through a type of internal sight, and they see all these images on their mental screen. A lot of those images are not actually present in the spiritual world, but they're how they clothe non-physical realities so they can access it and they can work with it. And so that's the imagination stage. We can now see non-physical realities in the mind's eye. We can't see with the physical eyes that there's an angelic being in front of us, but in the mind's eye we can begin to perceive that form.
Eyes. I've never seen his eyes before.
But you said they were friendly.
All right. I'll take in my head. Just pull the binoculars away. God, give me strength.
All right.
Pull it down. Run. Pull the binoculars down and run. God. If there's my God, give me strength. I gotta get away. Oh, babe!
All right,
We gotta get away, babe!
All right, calm down, calm down.
I'm driving.